Making Manitoba Delicious. My name is Steve. I work here upstairs actually. I work for Mennonite Central Committee, MCC Manitoba. I'm the Peace Programs Coordinator. And I'd like to explain just a little bit about what peace has to do with delicious Manitoba food. Is that one of the things that we have discussed in the Mennonite community is that there's a divide between rural and urban, between the producers of food and the eaters of food. And so we feel that as a faith community and as a broader community, we want to address some of these questions of why food matters to all of us, and how we can, as somebody said recently, how we can bridge the gap between farm and fork, how we can bring these things closer together. And by getting a better grasp on local availability, on growing our own food, on preserving our own food, and so forth, I think that we get a better understanding of the food production scene, and also understand that, which many of you will already know, that lots of food comes from far, far away, but there's also plenty of really great options available right here in Manitoba. So we want to talk about a few different aspects of that. Food has always been an important part of the Mennonite community, not only because we all love to eat things like farmer sausage and pierogies and so forth, but part of our main work in the world is, as MCC, is relief and development. So if there's a food crisis somewhere, we send people with resources to help deal with food crises. We also believe that that part of our task is to build a worldwide community, and so we have interesting resources that talk about food questions. Under Vine and Fig Tree is one important book. A Table of Sharing is another that we have produced recently. We have a series of cookbooks that also focus not only on cooking but on food justice issues. So that's a little bit about why MCC is involved with this. For this summer, we've been one of the partners with Food Matters Manitoba, which is interested in a lot of the same issues. And I'd like to give an opportunity to Kylie to say a few words about Food Matters and the Dig In Challenge.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming out. We are super excited. This is our first year of the Dig In Challenge, as a lot of you guys know, so it'll be for the next 4 years. And we're really thankful to MCC for partnering with us. This is great. We have a lot of common interests when it comes to eating local food and sustainable food practices. So thank you very much, Steve, for partnering with us and your organization. So anyways, everyone enjoy the workshop, and yeah, thanks very much.
This place is Sam's Place. It's a not-for-profit social enterprise, part of the work of MCC, and it's a place to gather for meals, for coffee, but also it's a community place, a community space. There's the performance venue, and we also try and use the space for workshops such as this one. Now, you can see we have 4 different areas that we're going to be talking about today: keeping it delicious, growing it delicious, cooking with bugs, and cooking it delicious. And we have 4 eager presenters who are may not be professionals in each of their field, but they're all passionate about Manitoba food, about food justice questions, and so we're going to start off with Natasha. She is just graduated or just finished her studies at Canadian Mennonite University in theology, but she also happens to be my, my daughter, middle daughter. And as a family, we have read a couple of books in the last few years. One is called The Omnivore's Dilemma. Have any of you seen or heard of this one? And the other one is by the same author. It's called In Defense of Food. Really interesting and well-written, entertaining books about how food works in our system. So anyways, that's really shaped how our family has thought about foods. And Natasha is going to talk about keeping Manitoba delicious. So given that we're still using preserves from last year, it's maybe it's okay to start with preserving rather than starting with growing. So Natasha.
As was mentioned, I'm Natasha. I just finished my university degree and I started gardening about 4 years ago. I was one of the founding members of the community garden at Canadian Mennonite University. And part of why I was interested in that is, as Steve alluded to, some reading I had been doing, and it was kind of a variety of different sources for me. One was that I was learning a lot more about food and the injustices that we find within our food systems and the lack of sustainability that's sometimes present. But another piece of it was my theological studies that were teaching me to engage the world around me critically, and not just the world of church and academics, but my whole life. And gradually it became apparent to me that it was really important to be able to integrate that. And as someone who's always loved to cook and to bake, and as I've become increasingly interested in good food and good ingredients, I realized that there was a piece missing there. Another factor for me is that I grew up moving around a lot, and so I never felt particularly rooted to one geographical place. There was never any kind of connection to physical land for me, and so food was a fairly abstract idea, one that came from the store and not, that wasn't really connected to my own experience. And as I started gardening, I realized that there was a lot more to it than just sticking some seeds in the ground and hoping that things would grow, watching them impatiently. And so it was my roommate and I at the time, we decided to garden together, and that we were going to grow as much as we could and try to eat out of our own garden for the year. We didn't commit completely to the 100-mile diet, but it was pretty close. And so in conjunction with our garden, we also found a bunch of local sources that grew things like beans and different legumes, as well as local flour and some other grains, and decided to source our food that way. I don't want to get too much into the gardening piece of things because that's coming later, but I discovered that preserving was actually a lot more work than the growing. And learning to can, or bluffing my way through canning and dehydrating, and was a bit of an adventure. But I learned a lot, and so yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and show some of the things I have. First of all, I brought here a dehydrator in which I've dehydrated, well, just about everything I could think of. Different fruits and berries. I have dried strawberries and dried blueberries, and lots of herbs and hot peppers, tomatoes, different fruit medleys. And so this, I don't know, many of you have probably seen dehydrators, but anyway, it has the trays, and it very slowly preserves your food, and is a lot easier than putting it in the sun to dry, that's for sure. So that's one way that I've learned to keep food. Another way is canning. This is a pressure canner, which is not entirely necessary for canning, but it's very useful. And so it's like a big pressure cooker pot. I don't know how many of you cook with pressure cookers, but it intensifies the heat and ensures that it kills all of the bacteria in your jars. So it has a rack that You set your jars on at the bottom so that they don't explode. And yeah, that's just another piece. Yes.
Oh, where did you get that?
That's a good question.
My
sister's.
house.
Yeah, I get it from my sister's kitchen.
I think you can buy them at Canadian Tire,
Yes.
places like
Yeah,
that.
places like
Yeah.
that. And it's something that, because like none of us need it all the time, we share it between a whole bunch of different households, which is a really great way to do it. And in fact, I've done most of my canning together with other people, where we just decide it's a big canning day and then get together and help each other, because otherwise it's a pretty arduous and time-consuming process to do alone. Some of the other samples I have here of things that I've canned or friends of mine have canned are some salsa that is mostly from vegetables grown in our garden, some peach jam, strawberry jam, some bruschetta, it's dripping, and canned beets, pizza sauce, a variety of different chutneys, an apple pear chutney, a spicy ginger chutney, an unlabeled one, which is a hazard of canning. You don't want to forget to carefully label and date all of the things you preserve. So that's just some examples of the kinds of things that I've worked on preserving. To briefly walk you through the canning process, I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, but first of all is sterilizing, cleaning your equipment, your jars, boiling them in water is the simplest way, and allowing the lids to dry thoroughly so that no air can get in, and then depending on the kinds of things, jam for instance, cooked jam, because you add the hot jam to the hot jars, it will seal itself once it sets, and so there's no need to put it in like a pressure canner, for instance, or to run it through a boiling water bath, as they call it. Something like tomatoes, because they're a little bit more volatile with their acidity levels, need to be put in the jars and then put in a canner for a minimum of 20 minutes. And so your sealed jars go into boiling water and boil that way. And then you let it sit for 24 hours, and that's how the seal forms. And then basically your food is ready to eat, depending on what it is. Sometimes it's nice for it to age, like the bruschetta that I made, because it's in a brine, you like it to be able to sit longer. And well, yeah, the dehydrating is simpler. All you have to do is put it on jars, and then you have lovely dried snacks or ingredients. One of the, I mentioned the Omnivore's Dilemma already. Some other books that were really influential for me were the Mennonite Cookbook, More with Less. That book I found is a really useful resource in terms of learning to think about food simply, using raw ingredients to cook whole foods, and to be able to do more in your kitchen on your own. And so it has lots of instructions on things like canning or making yogurt or those sorts of things that are harder to find in a lot of other places. So that, and also Simply in Season is the other part of that series that's focused on eating seasonally, and so the whole cookbook is divided into the seasons. And so there are the spring recipes, which are using ingredients that are ready earlier in the spring and then summer, and gives you information on how to keep your vegetables longest, what kinds of things they're best used with. At this point, are there any questions from anyone? Feel free to ask anything. If not, I think I'd like to do some sampling now. So people can come on and start sampling some things.
This is like a...
This is a salsa. It's a corn and bean salsa. This is a bruschetta, so it's pickled in a brine. Yeah. And yes, beets.
And did you grow the peaches or did you just get
No,
them?
these I bought at a farmer's market.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
The growers and
Good. So our next presenter is Val Smith. Val is an instructor and administrator at Canadian Mennonite. Are you a professor?
No, administrator.
Okay, at Canadian Mennonite University. She helps or she administers the School of Peace Building. Canadian School of Peace Building, sorry. And she has also been an active community gardener for a number of years, and she has found also it to be a very important family activity and event. So she's going to tell you what she's experienced in gardening and maybe teach us a few things about how to tell the difference between a weed and a pea or whatever it is. Thanks for coming, Val.
Well, I'm sure that all of you, or many of you, have some experience of gardening, but I hope that there will be some things that are new for you today. And I'm going to focus primarily on what makes gardening family friendly, though many of the same things I think make gardening fun for the rest of us as well. I have two daughters. They are 9 and 7, and we've been gardening since before they were born, so it's just part of their life that this is what we do. We garden in our very tiny yard, and this year we're also part of 2 community gardens, the same one that Natasha mentioned earlier at the Canadian Mennonite University, and another one at a church just a couple of blocks from us. So the first thing I want to talk about is finding a space, because some of you may have big yards and you can put a vegetable garden separate at the back corner of your yard and that works well. But many of us, me included, don't have that luxury. You either have a very tiny yard or perhaps no yard at all, which may make you think that your gardening options are limited. But they are, if you think creatively, there are surprisingly many options and you can grow a surprising amount of food in a very small space. So the first, I just want to give you a few ideas in case you're looking for ways that you can grow a little bit more. So the first idea, of course, is your yard. And you may feel like you want to have a vegetable garden separately and keep the flowers out front and keep that looking aesthetically nice. And that's great. But if you don't have a lot of space, it works really well to combine your vegetables with your herbs and with your flowers. And it does change the look of the garden a little bit, but it actually works very well because often those different kinds of plants complement each other, and that helps to reduce the pests in the garden and the diseases. And it still can be a very pretty garden if you plan it accordingly. Another space that you may not have thought of is the median, the space between the sidewalk and the curbs. Now in some neighborhoods, people generally leave that alone, but I live in Wolseley and there are lots of people use that space rather than just have that be a place for grass. That's a place where you maybe can get a little more light and a little more growing area. Another idea is to learn to garden more intensely. So in the traditional prairie garden where we have huge amounts of space, you have rows with big spaces in between each row where you can walk, and that works fine where you have a lot of space. But where you don't, you can fit a lot more into just a few square feet. And in fact, a book that's helped us as we're learning to garden more intensively is the Square Foot Gardening book. I've listed the information on that sheet that was passed around. I hope you've all got it, and it's also available in the library. And it's really helpful in helping you gauge, if I plant this many carrots, it's going to feed my family for this long, and that sort of thing. So you're growing a reasonable amount of food. Sometimes you can get carried away and end up having more than you want to deal with at the end. And it also helps you to see how closely you can plant things. On the back of seed packages, they often have pretty generous spaces between plants. And in reality, you can put them a lot closer together, which also saves on the weeding at the end. Once the plants get established, there's no room for the weeds to grow when they're tightly together. Another way to plant more extensively is to grow vertically. Things like pumpkins and squash and cucumbers, beans tend to spread out if you just leave them there. And again, if you have lots of space, that's great. But if you don't, you can grow them up. You can build frames. We've done some of that. But you can also use your fence. We have what we think is a fairly ugly chain link fence between the neighbors and us, and we both have little kids, so we plant beans there. And by the middle of summer, it looks like a hedge more than a fence and makes it a lot more beautiful. So you can, and you can also use the side of your house. Last year, we ran some strings from the little narrow space between our sidewalk and the house, We ran them right up to the second story of the house, and the beans grew up there. They made it all the way to the second story, which was really fun, but not very practical when it came time to harvest. So we won't do that again, but there are lots of possibilities there. If you don't have yard or you want more space, you also have containers as an option. And those have the advantage of being portable, so you can move them into the sun, move them around during the day or through the season as you need. And again, especially if you get some tips from people at the gardening stores, they can help you to fit quite a lot into that very small gardening space. If you make that container that much smaller, you can bring it inside and put it on a windowsill. So even if you don't have any outdoor space at all, you can still grow a few herbs or a few greens or other things like that. And another option is to, without any dirt at all, is to grow bean sprouts. And I think Steve has something more on that later. But I have put on the sheet a couple of websites there if you want to look that up and see how to grow your own sprouts to put in your salad or on your sandwich. And if you don't have a lot of space and you're starting out, I would encourage you just to feel good about that. With gardening in the spring, it all looks great and you can plant a ton of stuff and it can feel overwhelming. So if you only have a small space, use that intensively, make that a success, and then you can probably find some ways to go from there. And if you are looking to expand, then community gardens are a really good option. There's a whole bunch of benefits in being in community, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's a great way to get more space. And again, on the sheet that I handed out, I put a website that the City of Winnipeg has established for some of their community gardens. I don't think all of the gardens in the city are listed on there, so you can also just take a walk through your neighborhood, and if you see a garden, talk to the people working there, or there's usually a sign and you can find a way to get connected there. So I want to touch on 4 areas that I think, once you've found your space, are significant in making gardening fun for your family and making it not the sort of chore where you get out there and the kids are just whining for it to be done. And the first piece there, I think, is to give your kids some ownership in the garden. If they have some say in what you're planting and how you're doing it, they'll be a lot more excited about it. And I would say if you can spare the space, give them their own space to work in. Every year we take one square piece of it, and it's always proportional. So if we end up with a very tiny garden, they just get a smaller space. But they always have their own space, and they can pick what they grow in there, and they really like that. They're not always keen on doing all the weeding, and we help them out, but they take ownership in it, and they come and they see how things are growing, and they pick the things, and they give them away, and they eat them while we're there, and it makes them enjoy it a lot more. And you can have them help in the planning if you don't give them their own space. Sit down together with seed catalogs and crayons or pencil crayons and decide together what you're going to grow. And you'll notice on the back of that sheet I have a space where you can plant it, and later on I have some seed catalogs where especially the kids here today can cut out things that look interesting or color them in and sort of make a garden plan. And one thing you might find as a side benefit of this, I would say generally grow things that you think your family is going to eat, but you may also find that growing things is a way to get them to eat things they wouldn't otherwise eat. When our daughter was about 4, she refused to eat tomatoes, claimed she didn't like them until it became tomato season. And then she ate the cherry tomatoes that were in our yard like they were candy. They're so much fresher, they're so much more flavorful that she likes good tomatoes. It turns out she just doesn't like the bad tomatoes you can get in the superstore in December. So you may find if you plant broccoli or tomatoes or whatever it is your kids won't eat, that's a way to get them to start eating it. So giving them ownership of the garden is one piece that I think is important. Another thing that I think can be really helpful is to find community. And this is true for all of us. When we're doing things with people that support us and people that we find fun, it makes it easier to do it. And that's very true for the kids. The other thing about working in community that's really great is it's a good source of ideas and suggestions and tips. Our very first garden was a community garden, and we felt really foolish trying to figure out what we were doing, and it was really nice to be able to peek into the other squares and see what people were doing or ask how they were dealing with a particular problem. So it's a good way to start. And it's a great way to build relationships. So we've Sometimes we've had community gardens with family friends so that when our kids get tired of weeding or planting, they can run off and play with the other kids instead of sitting there saying, when can we go, when can we go? And we get another hour or two of work in, which is great. But we've also made other kinds of connections. One year there was an elderly couple from our church that was gardening in the same garden that we were, and all of their own initiative, the man in this family decided he was going to make a scavenger hunt for our kids. And so every week when they would come to the garden, he had another clue hidden under a rock somewhere in our plot. And they would have to find this clue and solve the puzzle. And at the end of the summer, it all came together and they got a book from him. And so this is something they looked forward to, and it built a relationship between him and them. So it was a lot of other benefits besides just the food that you get out of the garden. Now, if you're not in a community garden, that doesn't mean that you can't have community. Walk down your block and see somebody whose garden is doing really well, somebody who has a garden you admire, and stop and talk to them and ask them questions and figure out what's working for them. Most gardeners are very happy to talk about their things, especially if people admire what they're growing. So that's a good way to build community right on your block. You can also bring the community to you. If you give your kids a container to garden in or a part of your garden, maybe give one of their friends a space as well, and then you'll be getting the neighborhood kids interested in gardening, and again your kids will have somebody to do the gardening with. The third point that I think is critical to keeping it fun for kids and maybe for all of us is to grow things that are fun or unusual or weird to grow. We always think, if we're used to shopping in the supermarket, that vegetables come only one way. Tomatoes are always round and red, and carrots are always long and pointy and orange. But there's a huge variety of varieties out there. Lots and lots of different kinds of beans, tomatoes, beets, carrots, all kinds of things. And it's a lot of fun if the kids get to grow, say, purple carrots, or tomatoes that are in the shape of hot peppers, or things like this that add a lot of fun to it. If you're looking for those kind of seeds, you won't probably find them at Home Depot or the supermarket. You're going to need to order them from particular seed places. I've listed a couple on the sheet. There is Heritage Harvest Seeds, which is a Manitoba company, and they have a huge variety of heirloom seeds, particularly beans and tomatoes. The nice thing about using these heirloom varieties is they tend to be old varieties. They come true, so if you save the seeds and replant them next year, you'll get the same kind of tomato or bean or whatever that you had the previous year. And our genetic diversity, the varieties that we are able to choose from in the supermarket and our normal food sources, is really limited. And so it's fantastic if we can be growing this greater diversity if we're bringing these old varieties back. So it's fun for the kids, but it also does a great job of increasing our genetic diversity. Just to give you a couple of quick examples, we've started growing dried beans, and these beans here are orca beans. You can come up and look at them more closely later, but they actually have the coloring of an orca whale. And so my daughter, who did a project on orca whale, loves these beans, not because of the taste, but because of the coloring. And so she loves to grow and plant and eat these beans. Another kind of bean that we've been growing, these are the ones on the fence, are the Sadie horse beans. I don't know if you can see, but these are actually purple. And so they're a lot of fun. You plant them, the flowers are red and pink and white. And then when the pods have dried and you open them up, it's almost like a lottery or a contest. You know, am I going to get the pod that has the boring white beans, or am I going to get the pod that has the pink or the purple beans? And they tend to fade over time, but they're a lot of fun to grow, and our kids have really enjoyed that. Another thing we've tried is to have a color-themed garden. So to make it more fun, we're going to just grow purple in this section. So we have purple tomatoes, purple beans, purple carrots, purple beets, purple tomatoes. And it's amazing how many of these odd things you can get in these colors that you wouldn't expect. And they find it a lot of fun, and when people come over, they're very proud to show off their purple garden. One other idea is to use flowers, which are, of course, aesthetic, and that's a good enough reason to grow them, in my opinion. They also can help with managing pests and problems in your soil. But they're also edible. Not all flowers, of course, and you want to be very careful that you're not eating something that you're unsure of. You want to make sure that it's edible. But there's a lot of flowers that are edible. The petals from roses, the petals from pansies, nasturtiums, the entire plant. The leaves, the stems, and the flowers are all edible. And so the kids get a kick out of that, of eating the flowers or putting them into the salad, and it makes it a lot of fun. There are, again, a bunch of resources available for this. This is one of my favorite books. It goes through a whole bunch of edible plants, edible flowers, and then includes some recipes at the back in case you're not quite sure how to incorporate flowers into your diet. So those all make things fun. And then my final point would be to think beyond just the plants themselves. If you have a kid who doesn't love to garden, and we have one who's a little iffy on it, if you can expand it a bit to think about the whole life of the plant or the whole ecosystem, then it may engage their interests a little differently. 3 quick examples for you of that. In grade 1, my daughter went on a field trip to a bakery and they gave her some wheat seeds. So she brought them home and planted them in the little square we had given her in the garden. And they grew, and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we figured out how to harvest them, and we took the hulls off. And we had a friend who had a little flour mill in her house, so we brought them there, and she ground the flour for us. It, of course, wasn't nearly enough to make a loaf of bread, but we combined that flour with other flour that we had, and we had the bread from flour that she had grown. And so it was really neat for her to see all the way from the wheat seeds all the way to the loaf of bread. Another thing that's caught her interest is the insects in the garden. Last year she was given a mason bee house for her birthday, and it came with a video so you could learn about the bees and you could learn how to manage the house. And we haven't been very successful yet in attracting bees to the house, but what we have been successful at is paying attention to the bees in our yard in a very different way. So instead of the kids saying, oh, there's a bee, get it off me, is it going to sting me? They're looking at the flowers and they're saying, okay, I see at least 3 different kinds of bees here. It looks like they're going to pollinate the cherries. Maybe we'll have cherries this year. Like, they're paying attention to them as part of the garden, which has been really exciting. Another thing that they might find interesting is looking at wild greens. There's a lot of things that grow in our grass or in the fields that we think are weeds, and they're a hassle, but a number of them are edible. And again, please don't eat them unless you're sure that they are both edible and that they haven't been sprayed with anything, herbicide, pesticide, that sort of thing. But rather than the gardening in the rows or in your bed, if you go hunting for young dandelion greens and add them to a salad, that can be a way to engage your kids in the local food system and to look at what's going around us in a different kind of way. Are there any questions about anything at this point? All right. If you want, you can come up. I have 4 different kinds of beans here. You're welcome to look at them, and I think there should be enough that everybody can take 1 or 2 of each kind. I would have brought more, but we have built such good ownership of the garden with our kids that they were loath to part with any more of these fun beans. But help yourself to a couple of those. Feel free to look at the books. And if anybody wants to, while you're listening to the other things, do a bit of coloring, plan your own garden, you're welcome to look at and cut up these seed guides. I have pencil crayons and crayons here. Again, I need them back since I borrowed them from my kids, but feel free to start imagining your own gardening space if you want.
What are the first things about
This pack?
And there's dozens. I only brought 4 samples. These are called orca beans because they have exactly the coloring of the orca whale.
Yeah, they really do look like that.
Hi, I'm Lyndon, and I would like to talk to you today about what I call the effect of the butterfly diet. And there's a lot of trendy diets that come up, and I think this is maybe the next one. And for 2 reasons. The effect of the butterfly diet will give you a hot body, and it'll help you save the world at the same time. I think we should start eating insects, and I like to pride myself on having novel ideas, but this isn't a particularly novel idea, but I think it's time for us Westerners to start doing this. Why? Because our population is going up, and so is our meat consumption, as we have a rise of middle class in countries where there was a big divide between rich people and poor people before. Now it's equaling out, and people want to eat meat, beef. So we're chopping down our rainforests. And as you can see by this very scientific diagram, you have population rising over time, multiplied by the meat per person rising over time, and what do you get? You get the planet Earth plus the planet where we keep all the cattle. In 1990, people ate 20 kilograms per meat per person in a year, and in 2010 that went up to 50 kilograms in 20 years. And they expect that to keep rising because of the change in how money is spread out. And that's not all, but our population has risen from, well, it will rise from 6 to 7 billion, whatever it is now, to, they're predicting 9 billion in 2050. So we have a problem. We can only rip down so many rainforests and whatever else they're ripping down to store all the cattle, or we can maybe become vegetarians. That's one option. Environmentalists have already kind of gone that way, and that does make some sense. But there's a debate. We are supposedly omnivores. Should we be eating meat? Some people say yes. But right now, 2/3 of our farmland is being used for cattle production. And of course, that equation will not work out. But there's some good news. Mammals are inefficient at converting their feed into energy that we can actually use. And so here I have a piece of sausage, and it's like eating this part and throwing this part in the garbage. That's what it's like when you're eating meat. And so that is good news, because that means there's room for improvement in the way that we're using our land. And insects, on the other hand, they convert much more efficiently. As you can see again by this scientific diagram, we have all of these plants. This is plant energy, and through the digestion process of the cow, it's turned into that small amount of meat energy. Yes, meat energy. And insects take a much smaller amount and make the same amount of energy that we can use. Actually, this up here represents about 80 times the plant energy versus the amount of energy that's in the grocery store. Or that's not exactly true. That includes transportation and all the production of the cattle as well. It's actually, as far as food goes, 10 times the energy goes into an animal than we eat. So it's a wide difference. And insects convert at locusts, for example, will convert at 10 to 9. So you put in 10 units of energy, plant energy, and you get 9 units of animal meat energy. Okay, science class continues in a sec. Okay, so why is that? Well, one reason is because these sorts of animals produce a lot more heat than those sorts of animals, and that energy has to come from somewhere. That's one of the reasons. And also, if you can imagine, it's much more labor intensive and energy intensive to create one baby cow than it would be to create one baby insect. Crickets lay 1,500 eggs in 4 weeks. And so that's a little bit different than we're seeing with mammals. Yeah, and here's another little factoid for you. They say that all of our human transportation, what we're always talking about, like you should ride your bike, you shouldn't take airplanes, you shouldn't do all this stuff. Well, guess what? All of that is eclipsed by the greenhouse gases that come from our livestock production. And methane is one of the big problems with that. It's funny, but cow farts, they're actually a big deal. They're a problem. And 20% of our greenhouse gases come from livestock production. And some of those come from the feces of the animals. So with all this inefficiency, where does that energy go? Well, it goes to heat, goes into their shit. And, and so a neat thing about insects is not only do they crap less, but their feces are they contain fewer greenhouse gases per kilometer. Or not kilometer. You know, the other one, kilogram. Now, I also want to talk to you about water usage. This here is a destroyer. And it is if you can tell by my drawing, it's a large boat that is 0.155 kilometers long. So like, I would say as long as Winnipeg Stadium or so. So it's a very large boat, and this boat can float with some creative engineering in the amount of water that it takes to raise one steer. That's a lot of water. And if you're concerned about water usage, you may want to think about this before you think about whether you have the tap on for your toothbrush session. So here's another way to look at it. That quarter-pound patty that you ate for lunch took this much water, 2,500 liters. Now, and the water you drank in all of last year was 690 liters. So that's a lot of water for a very small amount of meat. And, you know, that's interesting. Now, insects, on the other hand, for example, locusts, they don't like water. So that's 1 point for insects. All right, so here's another point for insects, nutrition. Here is one of my other textbook drawings. We have insect meat, which is 60% protein and 6% fat. Of course, it varies by the insect, but this is based on the grasshopper. And not only that, but the fat is the good kind, unsaturated, kind of like fish. And we have beef on the other hand, which of course it varies depending on the cut, but 20% protein, 20% fat, and then you're getting your saturated fat, which we don't want as much. Well, insect meat is generally pretty much on par as far as your minerals, your iron, your calcium. It's also rich in all sorts of other vitamins, and of course, unlike many plant proteins, has all your amino acids. All right, so you could eat fish. That would be a good option, except often fish yes, they're a good source of unsaturated fat and good protein, but they're also a great source of mercury because of the long food chain. So there's a little bit of mercury in this, then these little fishies get a little mercury, and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and then the fisherman catches it and we eat it. So if you don't like mercury, you might not want to eat too many fish. And instead, you might want to eat this little guy. You know, now we're the pesticides, right? So that's an advantage, another point. Okay, another thing about insects is that they're much less related to us than something like a pig. We're very closely related to the pig, therefore we can share diseases with them. They can get the same diseases as us. We can actually share organs. They've done transplants between them. And some scientists think that that's a problem as far as having safe food to eat. So now this is a lamb, an example of an animal you might eat. And this represents a problem with eating animals. Isn't that lamb so cute? A lot of vegetarians don't like eating animals simply because they're cute. Insects, on the other hand, are disgusting. They're gross, and they're the only animal left that's politically correct to hate. Yes, they're an animal. Yeah, and so we should take advantage of that and kill them. And eat them, and take pleasure in eating them, whereas we try to hide this reality from ourselves. But you might say, yeah, they're disgusting. That's exactly the point. That's why I wouldn't eat them. And I would say to you, if you were drinking the secretion from the udder of a cow, that you do not have the authority to say what is gross and what's not. That's kind of gross. And if you've ever ordered lobster in a restaurant, that's like eating an insect, except way more disgusting. Those things are gross. So now that we've debunked that theory, let's talk about what the rest of the world is doing. I would submit to you that normal people eat insects. The green areas here are places where smart insect-eating people live. And the black areas are places where foolish, non-insect-eating people live. And 80% of people on the planet eat insects. And there are 1,000 species of insects that they eat. They are getting a much wider variety of animals in their diet. What do we choose from? We got the cow, we got the pig, we got the cute sheep. They have thousands, well, 1,000 that they choose from. Yes, so I would say if someone would tell me, why are you eating insects, what's wrong with you, I would say, what's wrong with you? Okay, so you also might be asking, but they're so small. How can you compare it to a steak? But I would say that rice is also small. So, all right, so now the next question, now that we've established that clearly we should all be eating insects, we just have this thing we need to get over. How are we going to get over it? And I think, as a person from the marketing industry, that this is the most fun challenge of all. And I think that the first step is that you need to reach a few key early adopter demographics. And one of them is going to be adventurous, attention-seeking daredevils, and those people are going to want to eat them just like the creepy, crawly goodness that they are. They're going to want to go to the high-end restaurants and have what you can get in, in the market in Laos or whatever, and this will be a fun for them, and they'll enjoy their friends being grossed out by them eating these insects. Another group will be environmentalists that want to have more iron intake or whatever, like the meat. They're going to want to have it packaged into loaves or other familiar products like hamburger patties, cricket patties. Yeah. And I have never eaten a cricket patty, but I just imagine that it'd be possible with the food science that we have to make a nice patty out of them. We eat soy all the time, but how many people actually know what a soybean looks like? Probably not too many. So we can do the same thing with grasshoppers. Now, there's another demographic, and that's bodybuilders. They will embrace this. They'll want it in a protein powder, and they'll be proud that their grasshopper shake has got insects in it, because they're weird that way. They'll do anything for protein, and they have things on their counter that say like muted mass, and so they'll be happy to have grasshopper powder. And just in case they have any reservations, I've written a little script for a commercial for these gym monsters, and it goes something like this: the grasshopper, the most powerful animal alive, can lift 3.1 kilograms with a single leg. That's like a bag of sugar or something. Scale that up to your weight class, and we're talking leg pressing 120,000 pounds with one leg, and they have 6. Get grasshopper power in your next shake. And that's my presentation on why we should eat insects.
So I'm the manager of Sam's Place, and one of the things that we've been doing lately is trying to create a menu that features more local foods. And so, as somebody who grew up in BC, I came to Manitoba thinking that there wasn't anything particularly good that could be grown here. And I have since learned that I'm wrong. Most of the things that I love to cook with are from Manitoba, which is very exciting for me. So I'm just going to show you a few of my favorite ingredients and then sort of explain. I've made a few things here while we were waiting, and I will actually make some bread with you. So yeah, one of my favorite things when I was growing up were sunflower seeds, which are of course from Manitoba. We have, one of my favorite recipes is actually uses sunflower seeds instead of nuts. So if you have a nut crumble or something like that that you want to put on an apple crumble with some sunflower seeds, it's really, really good with brown sugar. So I usually take them and puree them in a food processor and use them like nut flour of any kind. Flax seeds also can be grown in Manitoba. They're delicious. Not only are they good for you, but they add a really nice crunch. So I always put them in granola or granola bars. And they're really good in smoothies. I usually put them in my smoothies and they make everything nice and thick. So it gives the illusion of, I don't know, good smoothiness. Honey. Clearly you can get honey in Manitoba. This stuff is from Steinbach and it's some of the best honey I've ever tasted. So I highly recommend that. And you can use honey in a lot of places that you would use sugar and it just tastes better. So using honey actually makes your food taste way better than sugar does, and it's better for you. Oil also, canola oil is grown right here in Manitoba. You can also get sunflower seed oil. One of my newest favorite oils is a raw canola oil, and it's been likened by a number of chefs to the olive oil, the extra virgin olive oil of the prairies. It has much more flavor, it kind of tastes nutty. It takes some getting used to, but it's delicious. Also, something that's really surprising, coriander, which seems like a very exotic spice, is actually able to be grown right here in Manitoba. You can grow it in your own garden. It's basically the seed that comes from cilantro. So if you plant cilantro, you can get the leaves, and then you just cut them all off and let them grow again, and they'll get these beautiful stalks. They'll flower in your garden. You let them dry out, and in the winter you just harvest your coriander, and you can make curries with it. So it's a little bit more exotic. The other thing, dried red pepper flakes. You can also plant jalapeno peppers or red peppers. They grow beautifully here. I used to think that peppers were really, really difficult to grow, but that's because I'm from BC, where we don't grow peppers. But here, peppers are amazing. I also am a big fan of lentils and split peas. So I have a split pea soup here that you can all try later. I just finished making it, and it's basically split peas that have been soaked and then boiled for a while and sauteed with onions and some curry spices like coriander and salt and garlic, and with a little bit of milk in it. So it's very good. We often serve it here. It's one of the favorites. And we also have just red lentils. Red lentils are one of my favorite things to use in a curry because they cook up so quickly. And they're delicious, and you can make all sorts of exotic dishes with them. Ethiopian food, red lentil dolls, all sorts of things like that. Also roasted red pepper lentil soups. You just put them in the pot, they thicken it up. Also, lentils are a really good way to make beef go further. So if you have ground beef, you can add some lentils to it, and then it just seems like there's way more ground beef, but it all tastes like ground beef, but it's cheaper. So those are the main things that I have here. So what I'm going to do now is, a lot of people are really afraid of making bread. And I love to make bread, I love to make yeast bread, but sometimes you just don't have time. So I'm going to show you how to make a loaf that looks like this. In a very short amount of time. So I started this before you guys came, or just as you guys were coming in, and it's already pretty much cooled off now. So all you do, and this is a specialty loaf now, you can make a loaf of bread like this using pretty much any kind of flour. So rye flour is a really nice one you can make. It's basically an Irish soda bread, but I like to use something other, like a number of different flours, rather than just your regular white flour. It makes it healthier, it makes it heartier, it has more flavor. So I use oats. Now what I do is we get our oats from a local farmer, and then I take them and I put them in a food processor to make oat flour. So it's just very finely ground oats. They have a little bit of texture, as you can see. They're not completely flour, but they're much finer than you would normally have. So I just take 2 cups of that and dump it in my bowl. And you can keep these on your counter or in your fridge. I also use these to make granola bars. They stick together a bit better. And then I take 2 cups of white flour. You can use whole wheat flour too, but this time I'm using white flour. It's a little bit fluffier. And again, white flour is one of those things that you can easily get in the prairies. Now, some salt. I don't have a measuring spoon, but you need a teaspoon of salt. And you need 1 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. So sort of like that. And then you stir. You don't probably need a bowl this big, but this is what we have. And then the last ingredient is buttermilk. Now, I'm not somebody who usually has buttermilk in my fridge, so whenever anything calls for buttermilk, I always just take a little bit of white vinegar, so usually a tablespoon of white vinegar for a cup of milk, and I make my own buttermilk. And it kind of looks gross and curdled, but basically the reason for the buttermilk is to react with the baking soda and make it all fizzy and bubbly so it can rise in the oven. So that's all you need to do, and you just pour that in.
Is that 2 cups of buttermilk?
Yeah. 1 3/4. And you stir.
Question about how much baking soda you put in, or powder, or whatever.
1 3/4 of a teaspoon. 1 3/4 cup. Yeah. Now mine is a little wet. Sometimes it's not quite right. So the nice thing about this is if it's a bit wet, you just add a little bit more flour. Yes. It works fine with the non-dairy milk. Most things work fine with non-dairy milk. Yeah, some things don't quite, but no, I have a friend who can't have milk, and so I've made this for a number of times for her, so it works really well. Also, if you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can use goat milk. No? That's too bad. But yes.
Originally, you added 1 cup of white flour?
Originally I added 2 cups, and the recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups. So it really just depends on how moist the air is, that kind of thing. You don't want it to be too damp, but you just want to be able to hold it. So if you need more, you just add a little bit more. It won't hurt it. So then you have this lump of dough, and you shape it. So basically you just do like that, and it's done. So now I would just put this in the oven, and it rises up, and in an hour at 400 degrees, you have bread that looks like this.